The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, thin and official. The kind that doesn't need thickness. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen in Boston. The kind that doesn't cooling in my hand to carry weight. When I saw the return address. I was standing in my kitchen Commonwealth in Boston. Credit Bureau. Coffee cooling in my hand. My name was printed across when I saw the return address in cold black letters. Commonwealth Credit Bureau. Arlene Whitmore. My name was printed across the front in cold black letters. Maybe a credit card offer Arlene or some promotional nonsense. I opened it carefully. Instead, expecting maybe a credit card offer for a debt or some promotional nonsense. $12,000. I found a collections notice. The account was listed as I'd never heard 3 years ago when I was still finishing my master's degree. The account was listed as opened 3 years ago when I was still finishing my master's degree. The different Arlene Whitmore. I read it twice. Who must exist somewhere in Massachusetts. The wrong address. But the birth date. The different Arlene Whitmore who must exist somewhere in Massachusetts was mine. But the payment history showed 27 months of missed security number before the account went to collections. And the payment history showed 27 months of missed payments. I set my coffee down slowly and reached for my phone. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a mistake. I set my coffee down slowly and reached for my phone. I called the number on the letter immediately. The automated system asked me to verify my identity on the letter, then transferred me to a collections agent named Patricia. To verify my identity. Her voice was professional, then transferred me to a collections agent named Patricia 1,000 times before. Her voice was professional but tired, she said after pulling up my account 1,000 times. You're currently delinquent on a personal loan, she said after pulling up my account. 2021. You're currently delinquent on a personal loan opened in August of 2021. With interest and fees. The original amount is now $12,400. With interest and my voice steady. The balance is now $12,400. Patricia paused. I kept my voice steady. Our records show the loan was processed through Atlantic Savings Bank. Paused. The application was submitted online with your social security number and verified through your existing banking relationship. The application was submitted online with your social security number and verified through your existing banking relationship. My bank. I'd had an account there since high school. Atlantic Savings. Can you tell me what address was listed on the application? I'd had an account there since high school. I asked. Can you tell me what address was listed on the application? 147 Crescent Road, Malden. She typed for a moment. That was my parents' 147. House. The house I grew up in. Malden. The house I hadn't lived in since college. The house I grew up in. The house I hadn't lived in right away. I'd learned early that accusations without evidence I didn't call my parents right away. I'd learned early that I drove to the Atlantic Savings branch near my apartment and asked to speak with someone about fraud. I drove to the Atlantic Savings branch near my apartment and asked to speak with someone about fraud. As I explained the situation. A woman in her 40s. She pulled up my account history and listened carefully as I explained the situation. She said slowly. She pulled up my account history and frowned. It was processed through our online portal using credentials linked to your checking account. It was processed through our online portal using credentials linked to your IP address or location where it was submitted. I leaned forward. Can you show me the IP address or location where it was submitted? Her expression changed. Ruth hesitated. The application originated from an IP address in Malden, she said quietly. The application originated from an IP address in Malden, Crescent Road, she said quietly. And the disbursement check was mailed to 147 That's my parents' address, I said. I felt my pulse in my ears tightened with something like recognition. That's my parents' address. Miss Whitmore, she said carefully. Ruth's face tightened. This isn't the first time I've seen this pattern. Miss Whitmore, she glanced toward her supervisor's office. This isn't the first time I've seen this pattern. You need to file a police report. She glanced toward her supervisor's office. I sat in my car outside the bank for 20 minutes. You need to file a police report. Hands gripping the steering wheel. I sat in my car outside the bank for 20 minutes. Difficult hands about money. The steering wheel. Dad worked construction. My parents had always been. His back gave out when I was difficult 16. About money. Mom cleaned houses until his back gave out when I was 16. We weren't poor. Mom cleaned houses one emergency away from crisis. I'd watched them stress over heating bills, always one emergency away from crisis. Over the cost of my college application, stress over heating bills. I'd taken out student over groceries to avoid over the cost of my college application. I'd worked 3 jobs during undergrad to pay my own rent to avoid burdening. And now I was staring at evidence 3 jobs during my identity to pay my own $15,000. And now I was staring at rational part of my brain understood desperation. $15,000. The part that had watched Dad every time my brain understood pride and poverty make people do things they regret. Dad wins once every time he bent over knew that pride and poverty my social security number for tax forms and financial aid that had trusted them, felt that had shared my social security number for tax forms and financial aid paperwork. It sits in your chest something like a stone. Betrayal. I started the car and drove toward Malden. It sits in your chest. My parents' house looked the same as always. I started the car and drove toward Malden. The kind of working class home that's maintained through stubbornness and elbow grease. Neat. The kind of working class in the driveway that's maintained through stubbornness and elbow grease. I knocked instead of using the driveway because this wasn't a family visit. The wheel wells. Mom answered. I knocked instead of using my key because this wasn't a family visit. I didn't know you were coming. Surprise, her smile was genuine, warm. Arlene, the smile I didn't know you were coming. It made what I had to do harder. Warm. We need to talk. I'd known my whole life, I said quietly. It made what I had to do harder. Still smiling. We need to talk. And called for Dad, I said quietly. He came out of the den. She stepped aside. Reading glasses, still smiling, on his forehead, and called for Dad. Looking older than I remembered. He came out of the den. The lines around his eyes pushed up on his forehead. His hands, older than I remembered, strong enough to frame houses, around his eyes trembled slightly when he set down his newspaper. Once strong enough to frame houses. Trembled slightly when he set down his newspaper. I got a letter from a collections agency. On the couch, I said. I stayed keeping my voice level. I got a letter from a collections agency. I said, Mom's face keeping my voice level blank. For a loan Dad's I never took out to his hands. Mom's face was all the confirmation blank. I needed. Dad's eyes dropped to his hands, thin and fragile. That was all the confirmation I needed. Dad spoke. The silence Arlene, stretched thin. We were going to tell you. His voice was rough, Dad spoke, apologetic. Arlene, but not surprised. We were going to tell you, not confused. His voice was rough, just apologetic. Tell me not what? Surprised. I asked, not though confused. I already knew. Just Mom's hands twisted in her lap. I asked, we needed help. Though I already knew. She said softly. Mom's hands the medical bills in from her father's surgery. We needed the property tax increase. She said softly. We were drowning. The medical bills we from your father's surgery before you ever found out. Increase. We were drowning. Felt my chest tighten. We thought we could pay it back. So you took out a loan in my name without asking me. I felt my chest tighten. Dad looked up. So you took out a loan in my name without asking before. Shame, Dad looked up, but also defiance. I saw something in his eyes you were I'd never seen before, he said. Shame, yes, you had your but own also debts. Defiance. We didn't you were want in to grad burden school. You. He said. The logic was so backward your own it almost made me laugh. We didn't want to burden instead you committed the identity theft. Was so backward I said almost quietly. Made me laugh. Mom flinched so like instead you committed her. Identity Don't theft. Use that word, I said quietly. She whispered. Mom flinched your like parents. I'd slapped her. And that makes it that word, I replied. We're your better. Parents. I pulled the collections letter from my bag and placed it on the coffee table between us. I pulled the collections letter from my bag and placed it on the coffee table between us. That you've been defaulting for over 2 years while I had no idea my credit was being destroyed. That you've been defaulting for over 2 years while I had no idea my credit was being destroyed. The interest kept jaw tightened. We'd make a payment, and the balance would barely move. The interest kept climbing. Mom reached for the letter. We'd make a payment, but I moved it back and the balance would barely move. How much have you paid? Mom reached for the letter. I asked, but I moved it back toward me. Maybe how much have you paid total? I did the math in my head. She swallowed. 15,000 borrowed. 3,000 total. 3,000 paid. I did the math in my head. 12,000 owed. 15,000 barely touched the 3,000 paid. And you never thought to tell me. That meant they'd barely touched the principal. A statement. And you never thought to tell me. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Not a question. We were ashamed. A statement. She said. We kept thinking we'd fix it before it got this bad. We were ashamed. But it was already bad 3 years ago when they forged my signature on a loan application. But it was already bad when they used my social security number without a loan application. It was bad every single month when they used my social security number while my credit score tanked. It was bad every single month they let payments slide while my credit score tanked. Something colder. I felt something the realization that I couldn't trust the people who raised me. Something colder. The realization that I couldn't trust the people who raised me. I left their house without saying goodbye. Mom called after me, voice breaking, but I didn't turn around. I drove back to Boston on autopilot, mind cycling through options. I could report them to the police. Identity theft is a crime, even when family does it. I could sue them in civil court to clear the debt from my record. Or I could do nothing, absorb the damage, and let it ruin my credit for the next 7 years. None of those options felt right. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone had buzzed 4 times. 3 calls from Mom, 1 text from Dad. Please don't do anything rash. We can figure this out as a family. I turned off my phone and opened my laptop. I logged into my credit monitoring account, something I'd set up years ago but rarely checked. The dashboard loaded, and my stomach dropped. My credit score was 542. 542. That wasn't just bad. That was catastrophic. I clicked through to the detailed report. The loan from Atlantic Savings was there, marked delinquent. But there was more. 2 credit cards I'd never opened. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never owned. All opened within the past 4 years. All using my information. All listing my parents' address. I printed every page of the credit report. 23 pages of fraudulent accounts, missed payments, and collections notices. The total debt in my name was over $47,000. I spread the papers across my kitchen table and stared at them like they were evidence in a crime scene. Because they were. This wasn't desperation. This was systematic. My parents hadn't just taken out one emergency loan. They'd been using my identity for years, opening accounts, maxing them out, then abandoning them when the bills came due. I thought about the conversations we'd had over family dinners. Mom asking about my job, my salary, whether I was saving for a house. Dad mentioning casually that I should keep my social security card somewhere safe. Were they evaluating my credit the whole time? Planning their next move? I felt sick. I opened a new document on my laptop and started a timeline. Every fraudulent account, every opening date, every missed payment. I needed to see the pattern. And what I found made my hands shake. The first account was opened 2 months after I started my first real job after grad school. They'd waited until I had income, until my credit was established. Then they'd struck. Calculated. Deliberate. Not desperate. Predatory. The next morning, I went to the police station in my neighborhood. The officer at the front desk directed me to the financial crimes unit. I sat in a small interview room with a detective named Paulo Reyes. He was in his 50s, calm, with a kind of face that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. I handed him the printed credit report and the collections letter. My parents have been taking out loans in my name for 4 years, I said quietly. I didn't know until yesterday. Detective Reyes scanned the documents, his expression neutral. And you're certain you didn't authorize any of these accounts? I never signed anything, I replied. I never received any of the money. I didn't even know they existed until I got that collections notice. He nodded slowly. Miss Whitmore, I need to be clear with you. Filing a police report for identity theft against your parents means this becomes a criminal investigation. If we find evidence of fraud, they could face charges. Are you prepared for that? I swallowed hard. What happens if I don't file? Reyes leaned back in his chair. Then the debt stays in your name. Your credit stays destroyed. And if you ever try to dispute it, the creditors will ask for a police report as proof of fraud. Without it, you're legally responsible. He paused. You can't clear your name without holding them accountable. I filed the report. It took 2 hours. Detective Reyes asked detailed questions about my relationship with my parents, when I'd last given them access to my personal information, whether there had been any prior incidents. I answered everything honestly, mechanically, like I was describing strangers. When I signed the final form, Reyes handed me a case number on a small card. This will take time, he said. We'll need to contact the banks, pull records, verify the signatures on the applications. Could be weeks before we know what charges might be filed. I nodded. What do I do in the meantime? Document everything, he replied. Save all communications with your parents. Don't delete texts or voicemails. If they admit anything in writing, preserve it. He paused. And Miss Whitmore, be prepared for them to get angry when they find out you've involved law enforcement. People don't react well when consequences arrive. I walked out of the station with the case number in my wallet and a strange hollow feeling in my chest. I'd just reported my own parents for a crime. The people who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework, were now subjects of a criminal investigation. Because of what they'd done to me. I sat in my car and finally let myself cry. My phone rang that evening. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately listened to the message. Her voice was shaking. Arlene, a detective called the house. He said you filed a report against us. Please, honey, you don't understand what you're doing. This will destroy us. Call me back. Please. I deleted the message, then immediately felt guilty for deleting it. Reyes had told me to save everything. I checked my voicemail trash folder. Still there. Saved. 10 minutes later, Dad called. I didn't answer that one either. His message was shorter, harder. Arlene, whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop. We're your family. You don't turn on family like this. Call us. I saved that one too. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop labeled Case Documentation and started uploading screenshots of the call logs, transcriptions of the voicemails, copies of the police report. If this was going to be a fight, I was going to fight with evidence. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. This is your Aunt Carol. Your mother is devastated. How could you do this to your own parents? I stared at the message. Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The family network was already mobilizing. I didn't respond. I just screenshotted the text and added it to the folder. The banks started calling within a week. First Atlantic Savings, then 2 credit card companies, then an auto loan servicer. Each one had received notification of my police report and was opening an internal fraud investigation. They needed documentation. Copies of my ID, proof of my address during the time the accounts were opened, signed affidavits stating I hadn't authorized the transactions. I spent hours on the phone, in bank branches, at notary offices. Each affidavit felt like a nail in my parents' coffin. But each one was also a step toward clearing my name. The credit card companies were the most aggressive. One fraud investigator, a woman named Patricia from Northeastern Bank, called me directly. Miss Whitmore, she said, I've reviewed your case. The signatures on these applications don't match your signature on file. They're close, but whoever forged them didn't quite get the loop on your capital A correct. She paused. This is a strong fraud case. We'll be writing off the debt and flagging the accounts. But we're also required to report our findings to law enforcement. I felt a cold relief. So this debt won't affect my credit anymore? Not from us, Patricia confirmed. But you'll need to dispute with the credit bureaus separately. And Miss Whitmore, I'm sorry this happened to you. Her kindness made my throat tight. Thank you, I managed. Detective Reyes called 3 weeks after I filed the report. Miss Whitmore, I need you to come to the station. We've completed the preliminary investigation. My heart hammered. What did you find? Evidence, he said simply. Enough to move forward. I met him the next afternoon. He had a folder on his desk, thick with documents. We pulled the loan applications from all the accounts, Reyes explained. We compared the signatures to your driver's license signature and to known samples of your parents' handwriting from their own bank records. He slid a page toward me. It showed 2 signatures side by side. One was labeled application signature, the other verified Arlene Whitmore signature. They were similar but not identical. The application signature has pressure points consistent with someone trying to copy a signature they're looking at, Reyes said. And the handwriting analyst noticed the same pattern across all 7 fraudulent accounts. Same person forging, same tells. I swallowed. So you know it was them. Reyes nodded. We also pulled IP logs from the online applications. 5 of the 7 came from an IP address registered to your parents' home internet service. The other 2 were submitted from a library in Malden, but the timestamps match your mother's library card usage records. He paused. This is a prosecutable case. Reyes explained the next steps. The district attorney's office would review the evidence and decide whether to file charges. If they moved forward, my parents would be arrested, arraigned, and potentially face trial. The charges could include identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Each count carried potential prison time. How long? I asked quietly. Identity theft in Massachusetts can carry up to 5 years per count, Reyes said. With 7 fraudulent accounts, they're looking at significant exposure. My stomach turned. Would they actually go to prison? Reyes leaned back. That depends on a lot of factors. Their age, criminal history, whether they cooperate, whether they show remorse. First-time offenders sometimes get probation and restitution instead of incarceration. He paused. But Miss Whitmore, I need to be honest with you. Your parents have stolen nearly $50,000 using your identity. The DA takes these cases seriously because identity theft destroys lives. They'll push for accountability. I nodded slowly. What do I do now? Wait, Reyes said. The DA will contact you if they need additional testimony. And Miss Whitmore, you should prepare yourself. If charges are filed, your parents will likely blame you publicly. Family fraud cases get ugly fast. I walked out of the station feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath me. The call from the district attorney's office came 2 weeks later. An assistant DA named Juliana Crawford asked me to come in for a meeting. Her office was downtown, sterile and official. She was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, with a stack of files on her desk. Miss Whitmore, she began, I've reviewed Detective Reyes's report and the evidence from the banks. This is one of the clearer fraud cases I've seen. The pattern is undeniable. I waited. We're moving forward with charges, Crawford said. Your parents will be arraigned next week on multiple counts of identity theft and fraud. I wanted to meet with you first because you're the victim, and I need to know if you're prepared to testify if this goes to trial. My throat felt dry. What would I have to testify about? The timeline, she said. When you discovered the fraud, what conversations you had with your parents, whether they admitted to the accounts. Your testimony establishes intent and knowledge. She paused. I also need to ask, have your parents tried to contact you since you filed the police report? I thought about the voicemails, the texts from relatives, the pressure. Yes, I said. My mother called multiple times. My aunt sent texts saying I was destroying the family. Crawford nodded, making notes. Save everything. Any communication could be relevant. Then she looked at me directly. Miss Whitmore, I need to warn you. When your parents are arrested, this will become public. Court filings are public record. Your name will be in those documents as the victim. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't prepared. Not really. But I said yes anyway because the alternative was letting them get away with it. Crawford walked me through what would happen next. Arrest warrants would be issued. My parents would be brought in, processed, and arraigned. They'd be given the option to post bail or remain in custody until trial. The court would set conditions, likely including no contact with me. What if they can't afford bail? I asked. Crawford's expression softened slightly. Then they'll stay in custody until arraignment, which usually happens within 48 hours. After that, the judge will decide on bail amounts and conditions. I imagined my parents in a holding cell. Mom, who cried during sad commercials. Dad, whose hands shook when he was nervous. And I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion. But then I remembered the credit report. The $47,000. The systematic lies. The way they'd looked at me in their living room, not with apology, but with entitlement. Like I owed them my identity because they were my parents. When will they be arrested? I asked. Crawford checked her calendar. Warrants will be executed tomorrow morning. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining the knock on their door, the officers with handcuffs, the neighbors watching. Part of me wanted to call and warn them. Part of me wanted to tell them to turn themselves in, to spare them the humiliation of being arrested at home. But I didn't. Because warning them would make me complicit. And I'd already decided which side of this I was on. My phone rang at 7:15 the next morning. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Arlene. It was my mother's voice, high and panicked. They're here. The police are at our door. They have a warrant. Arlene, please, tell them this is a mistake. I heard Dad shouting in the background. Heard someone saying, "Ma'am, you need to step back." "Mom," I said quietly, "I can't help you." She sucked in a breath. "You did this. You called the police on your own parents. How could you?" I felt my chest tighten. "You stole $50,000 from me. You destroyed my credit. You committed crimes. We're your family," she screamed. "That's supposed to mean something." I closed my eyes. "It did," I said. "Until you made it mean theft." The line went dead. I sat on my bed, phone in my hand, and listened to the silence. Then I got dressed and went to work because the world doesn't stop just because your family implodes. The arraignment was set for the following Monday. I didn't attend, but Crawford called me afterward to report what happened. "Both defendants pleaded not guilty," she said. "The judge set bail at $10,000 each, with conditions including no contact with you and surrender of their passports." I felt a strange detachment. Did they post bail? "Your father did," Crawford replied. "A bail bondsman covered it. They're out pending trial." She paused. "Miss Whitmore, the judge also issued a protective order on your behalf. Your parents are legally prohibited from contacting you directly or indirectly. If they violate that, they'll be arrested again." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "What happens next?" "Discovery," she said. "We'll exchange evidence with the defense. They'll likely try to negotiate a plea deal. Most defendants don't want to go to trial in cases this clear-cut." "And if they don't take a deal?" I asked. Crawford's voice hardened slightly. "Then we go to trial. And Miss Whitmore, if that happens, you'll need to testify. Are you still willing?" I thought about sitting in a courtroom, facing my parents, recounting everything they'd done. "Yes," I said. "I'm willing." 3 days after the arraignment, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away unopened, but something stopped me. I photographed the sealed envelope first, noting the postmark and lack of return address. Then I carefully opened it with gloves on, like it might contain something dangerous. In a way, it did. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, and it started with, "Dear Arlene." My mother's voice came through every line, pleading, justifying, blaming. "You were always so smart with money," she wrote. "We knew you'd be fine. We were drowning. You have to understand, we didn't have a choice." The logic was circular and desperate. She claimed they'd tried to pay everything back. That they'd meant to tell me. That involving the police was cruel and unnecessary. "We're your parents," she wrote at the end. "We changed your diapers. We fed you. We loved you. And this is how you repay us? By trying to send us to prison." I read it twice, then photographed every page and forwarded them to Crawford with a note. "Received today. Appears to violate the no-contact order." Crawford responded within an hour, forwarding to the judge. "This is a violation. Expect consequences." The consequences came fast. My parents were called back to court for a violation hearing. The judge reviewed the letter, confirmed it had been mailed after the no-contact order was issued, and found my mother in contempt. Her bail was revoked. She was taken into custody immediately. Dad sat in the courtroom gallery, face pale, as officers led her away. Crawford called me that afternoon. "Your mother will remain in custody until trial," she said. The judge was very clear that the protective order was not a suggestion. I felt a complicated knot of emotions. Relief that the harassment would stop. Guilt that my mother was in jail. And beneath it all, anger that she'd put herself there by refusing to respect even a court order. How long until trial? I asked. Probably 6 months, Crawford said. But Miss Whitmore, we just received a communication from the defense attorney. They want to discuss a plea agreement. My heart sped up. What kind of agreement? They're proposing guilty pleas in exchange for reduced charges and a recommendation for probation instead of prison time. They'd also agree to a restitution plan to pay back the full amount of the fraud. She paused. I need to know if you'd support that outcome. I thought about what I wanted. Justice. Revenge. My life back. What would the conditions be? I asked. Crawford outlined the proposed plea deal. Both parents would plead guilty to identity theft and fraud. They'd be sentenced to 5 years of probation with strict conditions. No access to credit, mandatory financial counseling, and a restitution plan requiring them to pay back the full $47,000 at a rate of $500 per month. If they violated probation or missed payments, they'd face the original prison sentences. It's a reasonable offer, Crawford said. It holds them accountable without destroying them completely. But I won't accept it without your approval. You're the victim. This is your choice. I sat with the decision for 2 days. I consulted a financial advisor to understand if the restitution plan was realistic. I calculated that at $500 per month, it would take them nearly 8 years to pay back what they'd stolen. I thought about my mother sitting in a cell. About my father's trembling hands. About the fact that they'd raised me, fed me, kept a roof over my head when money was tight. But I also thought about the credit report. The years of lies. The systematic theft. The way they'd looked at me when I confronted them, like I was the problem for discovering their crimes. Finally, I called Crawford back. I'll agree to the plea deal, I said. On one condition. What condition? They have to make the first payment before sentencing. I need proof they're serious about restitution. Crawford was quiet for a moment. That's reasonable. I'll propose it to the defense. The defense agreed. 2 weeks later, I received a cashier's check for $500 in the mail, sent through the court's restitution office. It came with a letter from the court explaining that this was the first of 96 scheduled payments. I deposited the check and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not closure, just a clinical acknowledgement that the system was working. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following month. Both my parents appeared, my mother released from custody for the proceeding. They stood before the judge and answered yes when asked if they understood the charges. Yes, when asked if they were pleading guilty voluntarily. Yes, when asked if they understood the consequences. The judge accepted the pleas and scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. I attended the sentencing hearing. It felt important to be there, to close this chapter in person. My parents sat at the defense table with their attorney. Neither looked at me. The judge reviewed the case, the evidence, the plea agreement. Then he looked at my parents. This court takes identity theft seriously, he said. The betrayal of trust in this case is particularly egregious because it involved family. Miss Whitmore trusted you with her personal information, and you exploited that trust systematically for years. He sentenced them each to 5 years probation, as agreed. Then he added one more condition that wasn't in the plea deal. You will also each write a letter of apology to your daughter, he said. And those letters will be filed with this court as part of the record. My mother made a small sound. My father's shoulders sagged. The judge's gavel came down. Court is adjourned. The apology letters arrived 3 weeks later, forwarded through the court. I opened them in my apartment, alone, with a cup of tea I didn't drink. My mother's letter was long, emotional, full of excuses wrapped in remorse. She claimed they'd been desperate, that they'd convinced themselves it would be temporary, that they'd never meant to hurt me. I hope someday you can forgive us, she wrote at the end. My father's letter was shorter, more direct. We were wrong, he wrote. We stole from you. We lied. We broke your trust. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I read both letters twice, then filed them in my case documentation folder. I didn't respond. The court didn't require me to. Over the next year, the restitution payments came every month. $500, like clockwork. I put each payment into a separate savings account, watching the balance grow. The credit bureaus slowly updated my reports as the fraudulent accounts were removed one by one. My credit score began to climb. 542 became 610, then 670, then 720. I refinanced my student loans at a better rate. I got approved for a new credit card in my own name, with my own credit line. I started rebuilding what my parents had destroyed. And slowly, the knot in my chest loosened. 2 years after I filed the police report, my credit score hit 780. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing my financial statements, when I realized I'd recovered. Not just financially, but emotionally. I no longer checked my credit report daily, terrified of new fraudulent accounts. I no longer flinched when the phone rang with an unknown number. I'd built something my parents couldn't steal, a future based on my own work, my own decisions, my own name. The restitution payments continued. My parents had $19,000 left to pay. At their current rate, they'd be making payments for another 3 years. I thought about reaching out sometimes. Wondered if enough time had passed. If forgiveness was possible. But then I remembered the letter my mother mailed in violation of the protective order. The way she'd screamed on the phone when she was arrested. The entitlement in her voice when she said, "We're your family." That's supposed to mean something. And I realized forgiveness wasn't something I owed them. They'd stolen my identity. I'd taken it back. That was enough. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the Boston skyline. The city lights reflected off the harbor, steady and bright. And I felt, for the first time in years, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.